In this video, we are diving deep into a topic that reveals a side of Oregon that many people rarely think about, and that is the growing number of homes sitting completely empty in several cities across the state in the year 2025. And while empty homes might sound like a simple issue on the surface, the reality is far more layered and connects to economic changes, social shifts, demographic patterns, environmental pressures, and evolving lifestyle trends. And what makes this topic even more compelling is that it does not just affect large or well-known cities, but also many smaller and lesser-known communities that once felt stable and busy, but now carry a quietness that feels unfamiliar to longtime residents. And as we look at 10 Oregon cities experiencing this rise in vacant homes, we are going to explore what is happening behind the scenes and why these homes stay empty even as the broader housing conversation across the country continues to revolve around affordability, population movement, and shifting opportunities. And understanding this situation is important not only for people in Oregon, but for anyone interested in how housing markets evolve when faced with changing economic landscapes and technological shifts that reshape where and how people choose to live. As we walk through each part of this story, you will get a clearer picture of how empty homes can symbolize more than just properties without residents and can actually act as signposts pointing toward deeper changes unfolding across the state. One of the first things to understand about these rising vacancy rates is that many of the cities experiencing them felt the impact of population changes long before 2025 and even before 2020, when remote work became more common and families began reevaluating where they wanted to live and what kind of environment suited their lives best. And Oregon was particularly sensitive to this because the state offers such a wide range of landscapes and economies, from coastal towns that rely heavily on tourism to mountain communities that depend on seasonal recreation to former timber and mill towns that once thrived in an earlier industrial era but now face slower job growth and limited long-term employment opportunities. And when jobs begin shifting or disappearing altogether, younger residents often leave in search of steadier careers, which gradually tips the balance of the population toward older age groups. And when this happens, a city can feel increasingly stretched as schools see declining enrollment. Local businesses lose steady foot traffic and essential services become harder to support through local tax revenue, and each of these changes contributes to a gradual rise in empty homes. As retired residents eventually move away or pass their homes down to family members who may not want to live in the area. And when properties sit unused for long periods, they create larger pockets of quiet that subtly change the feeling of the surrounding neighborhood. Another major factor behind empty homes in these Oregon cities involves the shifting expectations of real estate investors who bought properties during times of economic optimism, expecting growth in short-term rentals or seasonal visitors or long-term population increases that never materialized. And in many cases, investors anticipated that tourism would continue expanding, year after year, especially in scenic parts of the state where outdoor recreation had been gaining popularity. And for a while, this seemed likely as travelers flocked to the coast, the mountains, and the rivers, and outdoor destinations became even more appealing during times when people sought fresh air and wide open spaces. But the issue is that some cities could not maintain consistent demand throughout the entire year, leaving many investment properties empty for long stretches. And eventually, investors who realized they were not making enough profit began listing their homes for sale, and because buyers were not always eager to relocate to these cities, or because lending became tighter, or because insurance grew more complicated in wildfire-prone areas, these properties often sat on the market longer than expected, and as a result, vacancy rates rose even more. The rise of remote work has also shaped the occupancy patterns in these cities, although not always in the way people expected when remote work first became widespread. Many believed it would offer a new source of population growth for rural and suburban areas, since workers would be free to live anywhere without being tied to an office, and some Oregon towns did see brief surges of interest as remote workers bought homes or rented properties for temporary stays, but this movement did not always translate to long-term growth, and in several communities remote workers realized that broadband internet was not reliable enough, or that essential services were limited, or that the local amenities did not fully match their lifestyle. And this reality led many remote workers to move again, sometimes within a year. And because this pattern repeated across numerous communities, it created a cycle where homes were filled for short periods by temporary residents, and then left suddenly empty again, leaving neighborhoods to continuously adjust to a revolving pattern of occupancy that made it difficult for cities to build stable populations or consistent local economies. Environmental conditions have also played a role in shaping vacancy patterns, as Oregon faces increasing concerns about wildfire risk, drought pressure, rising insurance costs, and changing climate conditions that make some areas feel more vulnerable. And when a city becomes linked in the public mind with risk, whether financial or environmental, it becomes harder to attract long-term residents and people who live in areas with high wildfire danger often reassess whether they want to remain in a location that requires ongoing preparation, evacuation, planning, and financial risk management. And when enough families leave due to these concerns, the number of empty homes grows larger, creating a sense of fragility around the community. And this has happened in several regions where wildfire seasons have grown more intense and evacuation alerts have become more frequent. And although not all areas face the same level of risk, the perception of danger alone can influence behavior, especially among younger families, deciding where to plant long-term roots. And when these families decide it is time to leave, they often move toward cities with stronger infrastructure, greater job stability, and more modern housing developments, leaving behind homes that may take a long time to find new owners. Many of these 10 Oregon cities also face economic transitions that affect occupancy in subtle but powerful ways as industries that once supported entire towns gradually shrink because of automation market changes or decreases in demand and, for example, timber towns that once had hundreds of high-paying jobs now rely on much smaller operations, and fishing communities face unpredictable seasons and changing regulations, and former mill towns must adapt to new forms of employment that may not offer the same level of stability or compensation. And when a city depends heavily on a single industry, any disruption, even a temporary one, can trigger population shifts that take years to reverse, and once a town loses enough of its workforce, the remaining housing begins to exceed the number of people able or willing to live there, and this imbalance leads to rising vacancy rates and creates a visible reminder of the economic changes that shaped the community over decades, not just years. Vacant homes also appear in areas where part-time residency has become common, particularly in scenic or recreational regions where people buy properties for seasonal use. And while occasional residency might seem harmless, it has a deep impact on local culture because neighborhoods with many part-time residents can feel strangely empty during large portions of the year, and the lack of year-round activity can affect everything from small coffee shops that rely on daily customers to grocery stores that need consistent foot traffic to community events that depend on large turnouts. And when these residents eventually decide to sell their homes, the buyers they attract are often also part-time residents, which keeps the cycle going and prevents the city from ever regaining a fully stable, full-time population. And this is a pattern seen in some regions where beautiful scenery draws visitors but limited job opportunities keep them from committing to permanent residence. Some Oregon cities also experienced shifts in affordability in ways that made it difficult for both current residents and potential newcomers to remain in the area, and this pressure appears most clearly in places where property taxes, insurance premiums, or maintenance costs rose faster than wages or local economic growth, and when living expenses rise beyond what the local economy can support, people begin to leave. And when they leave, they often do so quickly, leaving behind homes that take longer to sell because buyers may be looking in more financially stable regions. And even though homes may remain structurally sound and visually appealing, their price, combined with the economic reality of the region, can cause them to remain empty for long stretches, creating a mismatch between what the market offers and what buyers are actually willing to accept. Transportation, accessibility, and infrastructure can also influence vacancy, and this is especially true in rural Oregon, where certain cities are far from major highways, airports, and large medical centers. And as populations age, access to healthcare becomes increasingly important, and when older residents feel that essential services are too far away, they may choose to relocate to larger cities with better facilities, leaving behind homes that do not always attract younger residents because the limited job market does not support the move and younger residents. Often often look for walkable communities with easy access to groceries, schools, and recreation. And when a city struggles to offer these amenities, vacancy becomes more common as people migrate toward places where daily life feels more convenient and more connected. Another factor influencing vacancy is the way some communities shifted culturally and socially over recent years as new generations prioritize different lifestyles and seek cities with vibrant arts scenes, public transit, more diverse food options, co-working spaces, nightlife, and modern walkable neighborhoods. And some of the Oregon cities on this list have not been able to keep pace with these changes due to limited budgets, small populations, and slower development cycles. And as a result, they see younger adults leaving for larger cities or other states, entirely leaving behind homes that were once part of bustling neighborhoods, but now sit empty as the cultural center of gravity moves elsewhere. And these homes often remain on the market for prolonged periods because potential buyers want areas with dynamic social life and accessible public spaces. As we explore these 10 Oregon cities and look at why homes remain empty, we see that each city carries its own story, yet all share patterns that reflect broader trends shaping 2025, and this includes shifting job markets, rising environmental pressures, evolving lifestyle expectations, changing age demographics, inconsistent tourism cycles, unreliable digital infrastructure for remote workers, and fluctuating real estate investment strategies. And every time a home sits empty in these cities, it points to one or more of these underlying forces and paints a picture of a state experiencing both growth and decline at the same time, with certain hubs thriving and others adjusting to a slow transformation that changes everything from school enrollment to business survival to community identity. These homes become quiet markers of transition, and when you drive through these Oregon cities, the sight of dark porch lights and silent streets creates a sense of pause, as though the community is waiting for its next chapter to unfold. And whether these empty homes eventually fill with new residents or continue to symbolize shifting patterns in population and economic movement, they offer an important reminder that housing reflects the deeper story of a place, and that every vacancy carries a story of change, whether personal, economic, or environmental. And the more closely we look at these stories, the more clearly we see how Oregon and many parts of the country are entering a new phase that will continue shaping communities for years ahead.